Here's Steve Wozniak.
Chips.
What's that?
Chips. Chips.
What's that?
Chips. I never had the courage to ask Chips.
What's that?
Steve Jobs. Free chips.
What's that?
Chip company.
What?
Very few chips.
What's that?
20 chips.
What's that?
Which is very, very few chips.
What's that?
Chips I had
That's
with
right.
few chips.
Yeah, what's that?
Ram chips.
No,
with
what's that?
Ram chips.
What's that?
8 chips.
What's that?
Used the chips,
What's that?
including chips.
What's that?
Chips.
What's that? What's that?
Chips on.
What's that?
The chips.
What's that?
Chips.
What's that?
Chips. Their
What's that?
chips went bad to those chips.
Oh, what's that?
Registers, chips,
What's that?
dates, chips that were
What's
coming
that?
up. Small
Yeah,
chip.
what's
A
that?
couple of chips inside.
What's that?
Your chips could
What's that?
really do only one thing.
They do,
If
right?
chips
What's
were
that?
simpler inside a chip.
What's that?
I could use chips,
What's
the
that?
amount of chips, to few chips
What's that?
together and use a crystal clock chip.
What's that?
28 chips for the
What's that?
Pong design.
Wow,
I
that's
programmed
amazing.
These
I
little
never knew
chips
that. What's that?
The fewest possible chips.
What's that?
Higher and higher
Oh,
in
what's
chip
that?
count.
What's that?
Approaching 200 chips.
What's that?
Thousands of little chips.
Oh, what's that?
Wire chips together. Steve would wire the chips together.
What's that?
Connecting chips with
What's that?
wires, chips,
Wires,
and
chip,
everything.
what's the chip?
He took a
What's-
normal digital chip.
What's that?
A chip that works
What's that?
with ones and zeros,
What's that?
not waves. And you spun this chip
what's
around
that?
with one little digital
That's pretty-
chip. The
what's
whole
that?
thing used 45
How did you
chips.
do that? What's that?
They were paying us
That's
based
really
on how
good.
few
These guys are
chips
very-
I
what's
could
that?
do it in.
Brilliant
Talking
to
about
put that kind of stuff
microprocessor
together
chips.
because what's
Only
that?
now all the CPU
I don't know how they're
parts were
doing
on
it.
one chip
What's that?
instead of a bunch of chips.
What's
like
that?
memory
I don't know
chips.
how they're doing this.
A CPU
It's really
on
driving
one
me crazy.
chip.
What's that?
And mine had a
This is such a
CPU that was
knowledgeable
on
group of
several
people
chips.
to put that-
Or another
pull
processor
this
like
stuff together.
it. And
I
some
never
memory
could have done
chips,
what's that?
which
I
really
never
was
could have
just
done
a
something
glorified
like that.
bunch
It's
of
really
chips
difficult. What's that?
with just a
It's
few
really
chips.
difficult
And
to
a
that
couple of
to be
other
this
chips.
brilliant. What's that?
Read-only
To be this
memory
really intelligent.
chips.
What's that?
Chips that hold
I
their
could never do
information.
something
You
like
get a
that
ROM
because
chip,
what's
all
that?
the
It just seems like
components
it's
and
really
chips.
difficult. What's that?
Chip
It just seems like it's very
The chips
difficult
I
to
was
what's that?
interested in.
Very difficult
The
to
fact
do
that
this
this
because
chip was
what's
so
that?
easy to get.
I
Of
can't.
what the Motorola chip would
What's
have
that?
cost me. Chuck Peddle was
Chuck
peddling
Peddle? Who the
the
fuck
chip.
is that? What's that?
Put which chip?
Don't make
so
no-
that
what's that?
wire
It don't make
between
no
chips
sense.
would
What's
be
that?
short. The
Who the fuck is
majority of
Chuck
my
Peddle?
chips
What's
were
that?
RAM
Cocksucker.
chips
What's
on
that?
it, and two
Don't make no
interface
sense.
adapter
Okay, wait,
chips.
what's that?
I used
Cocksucker,
sockets
Chuck
for all
Peddle.
my
I
chips
fucking- what's
because
that?
I was
I
nuts,
hate his
where the
fucking
soldered
guts.
chips that went
What's
bad
that? Don't mean
easily
nothing to me,
removed
Chuck
bad
Peddle.
chips
Fuck you. What's
with
that?
a couple of PROM chips.
Cocksucker. What's that?
These
Don't
programmable
mean
read-only
nothing.
memory
Fuck you.
chips.
What's
Two
that?
of these PROM chips that were
What's that?
available. These chips would
What's
hold
that?
my monitor program.
How
and
long
some
is this
PROM
tape? It's
chips
fucking good.
and both
This guy's
programs
really
into the
smart.
chip.
What's that?
I borrowed 32 SRAM chips
What's that?
with these chips inside
That's
their
right.
sockets with all the chips
What's
in
that?
place to burn the program into
I can't
the
listen
chip.
to this.
I
What's that?
studied the chip's data sheets. Here was a computer with 30 chips on it, having
that?
so few chips.
What's
It was
that?
like the same amount of chips on an
What's that?
Altair. We're talking about a new memory chip,
What's
which would
that?
have 4K bits per chip. The first time silicon chip memory
that?
would only take 8 chips
What's that?
instead of the 32 SRAM chips with as few
that?
chips as possible.
that?
I had selection chips, vertical counter chips of the 2 of these selection chips, and maybe another chip or 2 worth of logic. Get a DRAM chip. 4K bit DRAM chips for sale at a reasonable price. But he got me Intel DRAM chips. I had to add a couple more chips to my computer, but the Intel chips were physically so much smaller than the AMI chips. A smaller sized chip with fewest chips. I was trying to get chips for a computer I'd designed. If I used chips by Synergetics, the computer had fewer chips than if I used Fairchild chips. Which Synergetics chips I'd use.
What's that?
The Synergetics chips I'd
What's
used
that?
in the design were much larger than the equivalent Fairchild
What's
chips.
that?
Not simply fewer chips. From designing for fewer chips, usually fewer chips means fewer connections, but not always. Add a couple of extra chips
What's that?
to go with Intel's chips.
What's
Because
that?
that chip design eventually became the standard
What's
for
that?
all memory chips.
What's
Solder
that?
all
I'm
their
just
chips
saying
to
it
a
now. I
printed
don't even know
circuit.
what's
They were
calling
getting
me.
chips almost
What's that?
free from their companies
What do you
anyway.
want, Ma?
We did end up finding
Ma,
a
you're not
chip
supposed- what's
distributor.
that? You're not
When he
supposed to
paid
do that
us,
with those
we
that
were able to
darker.
pay for the chips.
Ma, what's that?
Plug chips into sockets for
You
$1
fucking
a
sitting on
board.
it like that. I
Describe
don't
the
like
chips
this.
on
Ma,
the
what's
board
that?
with chips working.
What's
at the
that? I feel like
frequencies
I'm
you would
dreaming
need.
of something.
Just a matter
What's
of
that?
buying more chips.
What's that?
The Apple II would be designed with colorability on those chips.
Oh,
In
what's
doing
that?
this, I knew I would save some chips.
fucking hate
the
this
Apple
book. What's
II
that?
ended up with half as many chips
What's
as the
that?
Apple
Why is he
I.
saying
By
this?
now, I had faster DRAM chips.
What's that?
These new chips
DRAM?
would do
What the
it
fuck are
twice
these?
every microsecond.
Oh,
this
God.
little blank board with chips on the
Oh,
top
what's
side
that?
of it. There wasn't a single chip I
I
could
know,
save.
what's
I was
that?
so impressed to meet him after
Please.
the roll.
Oh,
His
me?
chip showed
What's
him
that?
how many chips and how
Oh,
it
chip,
worked
what's
and
that?
everything. That was making a chip that was
What's that?
compatible with. They said that any ROM chips
Rob,
we had
what's that?
around. connected to a ROM or PROM chip on the board with just a single PROM chip. The 22 or so chips, about 20 of them weren't needed. I stripped out 20 of their chips. I did this using 2 chips. One chip was a register and one was a PROM. And saving it to the master 8-bit chip register. And put in the exact same chips. And had us add chips that you do have inside the chip. That's because the chip didn't already have 4-bit microprocessor chip transistors on a chip. Memory chips.
Wow. So
that was fucking good. Let's hear that again. That was fucking great, this guy.